When one finds a worthy wife, her value is beyond pearls. So begins the 10th verse of the 31st chapter of the book of Proverbs, this beautiful book attributed to Solomon, the great wise man of the Old Testament, as he takes almost the conclusion of the book of Proverbs to talk about the qualities of a good wife. It almost seems out of place with our readings that we have today. But when we think about it, as we approach the end of the liturgical year, with next week being the Feast of Christ the King already, and then moving into the first Sunday of Advent, our thoughts become more eschatological. If you remember, that's an SAT word I gave to us last week, which means things pertaining to the end, things pertaining to the end of time, to the return of the Lord, right? Especially as we approach that Advent season, our heart starts thinking about, all right, we got to remember Jesus is going to return. And so if we're the church is the bride of Christ. We are the members of his body. We are called to be awake, to be ready. I was reading a story about a man by the name of Rob Robbins, who was a pilot in the Air Force during the first Gulf War, during Operation Desert Storm. It's kind of funny when I think about it that there are a number of people in this congregation, some of which who have probably even graduated high school and college, that were not alive during Operation Desert Storm. But anyway, the point of that being I'm getting old. So this pilot, after flying his 300th mission in Iraq, was told it's time to go home. And so he took his crew and they flew across the ocean all the way to come home, landed, I believe, in D.C., then had a long overnight drive into Pennsylvania, where he was from. So we pulled up just about an hour or two after sunrise on a weekday morning. He saw stretched out over his garage a banner that said, "Welcome home, Dad." And he was absolutely shocked because he didn't even know that he was coming home 24 hours beforehand. How could his family have possibly known? So he opened the door, announced his arrival, and of course, parading down the stairs began all of his children in various stages of dress preparing for school that day. And then finally, his lovely bride, Susan, came down the steps in a crisp yellow dress, her hair and makeup done perfectly to welcome her husband home with an embrace. And he said to her, "Honey, how could you possibly have known when I was coming? I didn't even know myself." She said, "Well, when we read that the war was over, we knew that you'd be returning soon, so we decided that we were going to be ready every day." Yeah. This is really the challenge that Jesus is giving us as his church, that we should be waiting for his return as a bride waiting for her husband to come from a long journey, to come home from a war, to come home from an extended period of time, and that we should be ready to embrace him and to welcome him with open arms every day. So now we have this great gospel, which really is all about stewardship. I said it. I said the S word. Did you guys cringe? Everyone cringes when the priest says that word because they think I'm going to talk about what? Money. I'm not going to talk about money. The reality, though, is that God has given all of us gifts. Many in what we've come to call talents these days, right? Which refers to an ability that we excel at above average, that we excel at in a different way than others. And by the way, the word talent, as we know it today, comes from this gospel. A talent, from the Greek word talenta, was a unit of measurements. A talent of gold, so the unit of measurement, like a pound or an ounce, you know what I mean? But a talent of gold would be worth about, are you ready for this, 15 years' wages. So a talent was no small amount. Even that one guy that just gets the one talent, that's 15 years worth of money that steward was given. All of us have been given gifts by God. They could be abilities like we see on America's Got Talent. They could be, maybe I will a little bit. They could be financial resources. It could be all sorts of things that God has given us. And everything that's good and pleasing comes from God. The question is, are we willing to put what God has given us at his feet for him to render according to his purpose? Because when he does that, when we do that, he's able to do amazing things through and with us. What it comes down to, when I read the gospel today, is a challenge to us. The good and faithful servant has two qualities, two things that he has to consider. One is that he is going to take a risk. Following the Lord, living the life the Lord calls us to live always involves a certain level of risk. And if you look at the scriptures, right, there's always been a risk involved in the call of a faithful disciple. Nowhere in the Bible, as you've heard me say several times, nowhere in the scriptures does it say, blessed are the comfortable. The Lord always calls us to step out of our comfort zones. As Mother Angelica used to say, sometimes you have to be willing to do the ridiculous so that God can do the miraculous. Burying a talent in the ground was not uncommon. It was very common in biblical times. I think it was also common in my grandparents' times. I mean, all of us hears the story about that one kooky relative that put all their money in a mattress or in mayonnaise jars in the backyard, Maybe not your relatives, or at least you won't say they're your relatives, but you've read the stories in the paper. But actually, if in biblical times, at least according to one of the commentaries I read, if you buried money in the ground, if you were a steward like this guy, if you buried money in the ground, you weren't accountable for it if it got stolen. You're like, okay, I did my job. So this is what he's doing. He's doing the risk-free thing. Wash my hands, not my responsibility. It's not going to go anywhere. Of course, it's not going to grow either. It's going to just sit in the ground. But at least this way, I'm not responsible for it if everything goes to pot. If the stuff hits the fan, I'm good. At least this money's still here. Instead of saying, wait a minute, maybe I should go out and invest what I've been given, into the world and see what happens. Jesus calls us, you and me, to go out and use what he has given us to build up his kingdom. Jesus does not want us to be, as I said last week, passive pew sitters. He calls us to be active in spreading his good news, in proclaiming his gospel. So the question to begin reflecting on right now is, what are my talents? What has God given me? And am I using it completely and totally at the service of Christ and his church? Or am I playing it safe, burying it in the grounds? Because it's much more comfortable that way. And then sometimes, people come and they come to the church with their gifts and the talents, and the church discerns and might say, you know what? Yeah, you do have some gifts and talents, but we actually see this gift and this talent in you, and we think your services would be better in this area of ministry in the church. And people get mad, people get hurt, people get upset. But it's all about that discernment, and again, allowing ourselves to be risky. And not just to be, part of it is risk, but the balance is risk also entails faith. It entails faith in God, faith in his promise, faith in his plan. So when we put our stuff at service of God and maybe we're told, okay, we're better off over here, what does that mean? Well, I look at some of the saints throughout the history of the church. A lot of the saints always wanted to do things that God had different plans for. St. Anthony of Padua wanted to go to the Middle East and die a martyr. That's why he entered the Franciscan order, because he saw the bodies of 2 martyrs coming back. Instead, God sent him to Italy. St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, first U.S. citizen to become a saint. She wanted to go from Italy out into Africa to be a missionary. God sent her to New York. Or one of my favorites, and kind of the closest I have to a named patron saint, is Blessed Solanus Casey. Solanus Casey was a Capuchin friar, Franciscan Capuchin friar, at a little friary in a little town called Detroit. And they kind of thought Solanus was stupid. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, and he was a little weird. So they gave him the job of being the porter. Do you guys know what that means? He was the receptionist, the bellhop, if you will. He opened the doors for visitors when they came, and probably later on answered the phone, things like that. Well, when they went to bury Solanus when he died, there were so many people at his funeral that there wasn't room left in the church. Thousands of lives he had touched by his ministry of just answering the door and being welcoming to people. Because Solanus took that risk. He put himself out there. He put himself at complete disposal to the Lord, and the Lord used him in amazing ways. And now he's a blessed on his way to becoming a saint. So I think the question that we have to ask ourselves is, am I taking risks? Am I putting the gifts and talents that God has given me at the service of Christ and his church? Do I have enough faith to believe that my God is going to do amazing things with me if I place myself at his service? If I allow myself to be used at his disposal? If I can follow him without fear, without reservation, the way these saints did? And ultimately, I think the answer to that question will be the answer to this question. For surely, my brothers and sisters, a time is coming when each and every one of us will be called to render an account of the gifts, the talents, and all the resources that God has given us, and to ask what we've been doing with them. So the ultimate question is, what do you and I want to hear on that day? Do we want to hear, "You wicked, lazy servants, throw this useless servant into the darkness outside where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth"? Or would we rather hear, "Well done, my good and faithful servant, come and share in your master's joy"?